watching the Mutual Fund Show with me, Tamanna Inamdar. On this show, we look at the biggest trends in the mutual fund industry and we try and work out whether these are good for you. Now, today we're picking up the topic of thematic or sectoral funds. These have always been popular, but more so this year. So think about it this way. The number of new sectoral and thematic funds added just this year has been 23. Taking the total number up quite significantly. Now, just for comparison and context, the number of new sectoral or thematic funds added last year was only 6. Moreover, more important figure actually to put this in context is that the net AUM for sectoral and thematic funds has grown over 40% this year. The reason, of course, is good performance. There have been some funds with great returns, and this has led to a cycle where AMCs, mutual fund companies, are launching more and more thematic funds. So you have funds covering everything from defense to infrastructure to consumption, what may have you. The question is this a good investment plan for you? Is it for everyone? What is the risk profile attached to thematic funds and how you should decide whether a particular thematic fund works for you or not? Now, to talk about all of this, I'm joined today by Hemant Rustagi, CEO of Wiseinvest, and Pankaj Mathpal, founder and CEO of Optima Money Managers. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today on the Mutual Fund Show. Great to have you here. Hemant, let me begin with your overview on the theme that I have laid out in the opening comments. Thematic funds are in vogue. Is it because AMCs are figuring out this is something that investors want? It is the flavor of the season, so to speak.
Well, Tamanna, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that, as we know that, SEBI allows mutual funds to, launch fund in different categories, and sector thematic is one of the categories. And since there are a number of sectors, there are a number of themes that mutual funds can follow. So you see a number of funds being launched in this particular category. And I think what we have seen always, what is happening now and what we've seen in the past, that whenever the markets are doing well, there is always going to be certain themes, certain sectors that do very well. So obviously they attract attention of the investors, and from their side, I think the mutual funds are trying to kind of, I would say, broaden the universe of investors, where they can all invest their money. But from the investor's point of view, clearly they need to see, what are the risks associated with that, what are the potential of that. And of course, important thing is maybe the theme or the sector they're looking at, they already have exposure to an extent through their diversified portfolio. So I think important to understand that funds will launch because they want to complete the basket of products, because they see opportunities there. I think the most important point from the investor's point of view is the suitability, whether it suits their risk profile, whether it suits their requirement or not, before they straight away jump into sector or thematic funds.
Yeah. So when we say let's figure out risk assessment, how would you do that? I mean, on the face of it, and I'm coming to Pankaj Mathpal on this, the returns from thematic funds have been very good. You've had, Pankaj, some excellent returns in some of the recent funds, and you can go into those details. I won't name names, but some have done really, really well in a short period of time. And then you start, because of that, the trend of investors wanting to invest even in more thematic funds. Is it a good idea? What is the kind of risk associated with a thematic fund, and why should someone not go into a flexi cap fund instead?
Yeah. Hey, Tamanna, there are different business cycles in the economy, and different sectors or different themes can outperform the broader market. So when you speak about the flexi cap fund is a diversified fund category which can invest across the sectors and across the market cap. But we know that at a particular period of time, a particular sector can perform better than other one. So considering that fact, if you know that during that particular period, which sector or which theme will perform better, you can bet on that. So when we are talking about the recent history that many thematic funds have performed or outperformed the broader market or the diversified fund, the reason is that those themes had potential to outperform during this period. But you have to understand that if we talk about sectoral funds, it means that fund will invest in a particular sector. And if we talk about theme, it means there will be few sectors which have related to that theme. And theme is, for example, I can give a basic example here. When we talk about a theme party, so what happens to music, choice of food, choice of cloth are something related to that theme. Similarly, when we talk about thematic, it means the sectors, it will not be a one sector, but there may be 4, 5, 6 sectors, but all the sectors will be related to that theme. So it means there's a narrow mandate. One thing good, because there are selected sectors, so there's a focused approach and there's potential. At the same time, there's a narrow mandate. So risk is if any region, it may be geopolitical, it may be any other region, which may affect that sector or theme, then it becomes riskier. When you invest in diversified fund, there are multiple sectors and fund managers have choice to move from one sector to another sector. So investors have to understand what is the objective of investment. If they really want to create wealth in a shorter period and they know that theme will outperform, they can take a bet on that. Otherwise, for long-term diversified funds are always better.
No, so here's the question. How would you know if a theme is going to, or a sector is going to perform well or not? Even the market does not know that half the time. You know, you guess it, but you can't be sure. Now, for something like a mutual fund, so for example, if you have a financial services fund, you have a healthcare fund, you have a consumption fund, how will you make that estimate? When we say that investors should know their risk profile, will you break that down? And let me come to Hemant first on this question, and then I'll return to Pankaj on it. If someone is watching this show and figuring out how much of my mutual fund portfolio should be a thematic fund, what's the answer to that? And how will they pinpoint their risk assessment or risk appetite?
Well, I think there are 2-3 aspects that you just talked about. Okay, let's talk about, what are the risks associated with that. When we talk about a sector fund, the investment universe is very narrow because it invests only in a particular sector. When we're talking about a thematic fund, that could be across sectors. Now, which means that the level of concentration is going to be higher, as compared to a well-diversified fund, but maybe more diversified than a sector fund. So the first risk for an investor is that you're investing in a very concentrated portfolio, which means that it may have the potential to do well, but at the same time, if it is not doing well, it can go down much more than the diversified fund, and the volatility could be much more. I think that's what investors need to understand and see whether they can withstand that kind of volatility or not. The second question that we said, as an investor, how to identify which theme will work, which will not. I think that's exactly the point that I was making earlier. That if as an investor, you are investing in equity, maybe you started investing a couple of years ago, you're investing through SIP, you want to benefit from the potential of equity as an asset class over a period of time. That's why you've taken a disciplined approach. There are 3 different segments of the market. You have large cap, you have mid cap, and small cap, and there are a variety of funds that allow you to invest. So your initial focus should be to understand equity, to understand what are the nuances of investing in it. Have a well-diversified portfolio before you start looking at something which is concentrated. Now let's talk about some of the themes. For example, let's talk about PSU, let's talk about power and infra. Okay, now these are not, maybe power and infra is a theme which has been in vogue for quite some time, and we have seen that there are periods when this particular segment doesn't do well, but over the last couple of years it has done very well. PSUs have done very well. Now the point is, as an investor, even though you know that the PSU, because of re-rating, because of the fact that the government is focusing so much on infrastructure and other sectors where PSUs can benefit, and like I mentioned, there could be re-rating that will do well, how much of the rally has already panned out? If you are looking at investing now, will this continue in the next year or next couple of years or not? If you are not able to make that out for yourself, which clearly means that thematic funds are not for you. When we invest in equity fund, there are different factors that we need to look at. My belief is that when we talk about that, understand the risk associated with it, level of concentration clearly, and the theme may not actually work out the way the fund manager is thinking. It may take slightly longer, which means that there will be periods of non-performance. So I think these are the factors that investors should look at before deciding whether they want to jump in or not. Build a portfolio, understand equity as an asset class, make sure that you have the risk profile to withstand the volatility that comes with it, and then start investing. And if at all you invest in them, do not invest more than 5 to 10%, because the key factor is sometimes you invest in these funds just because you want to invest in them. So imagine if I have a portfolio of 50 lakh and I'm investing 50,000 or 1 lakh, it doesn't do anything for me. So it should be ideally around maybe 5 to 10%, so that it should make a difference if your call of investing in a sector and theme works out. If you don't understand that, just stay away. And you need to be very clear that if you are invested in a fund which is consistently doing well, giving you better than average return, that means the fund manager will make sure that if there is a potential in a sector and a theme, that will be a part of your portfolio. So maybe you're already participating in that.
Yeah, so that's the question. Are you already participating in some of those companies through a flexi cap, through a multi-cap, or through other kind of funds? Do you need a thematic fund? Pankaj, I want to ask you that question as well. How do you assess your risk appetite and put it into context of returns, the kind of returns we've seen from thematic funds? Because that's the trigger, isn't it, at the end of the day? People want to go in for funds which are giving them good returns.
Yes, Tamanna, the thing is that there are various schemes. But this theme has outperformed, that you have to know, and this theme has potential to outperform the broader market in coming days. That is important question. So for common investor, it's very difficult. See, I'll put an example. Say you do not know that which stock or which sector will perform better, so you go for an index. But if you have knowledge that out of Nifty 50, out of these 50 stocks, there are 4 or 5 stocks which have potential to deliver higher returns compared to other stocks in the index. So you may go for that. So similarly, if an investor knows that because of some policy, government policies or some regions, that those sectors or those themes can outperform. For example, we take defense theme. Now, because of government policies or government's budget allocation for defense sector, it was expected that this theme would perform better, and it happened. So that is why if we see in past, defense stocks or defense theme outperform the broader market. So similarly, if you take example of manufacturing, if you think that Make in India government's policy or incentives for the manufacturers, whatever these kind of things or any other reason can be there, because of that, if you expect that manufacturing theme will outperform, so you can invest in that theme. So only either the investor knows it, that this theme will be better in the coming days, or the advisor should know that this theme. Otherwise, there are various themes. It can be ESG, it can be infra, it can be healthcare, but not all the thematic funds will perform same. So that is why it is important. First thing, it is only for the investors who know that this theme has potential to perform better. Second thing, otherwise, with the help of advisor, and advisor should know it, that this theme has potential to deliver better returns, and you can go for it. Otherwise, diversified fund, for example, if you take about any diversified fund, it will have a higher allocation in financial services, it will have a good allocation in IT, and along with that, if you take a financial services fund or you take a IT fund, your risk will increase. So that is why first thing, you set your financial goals, then you understand that how much time you have for that, and if you know during that period that sector will outperform, and one thing, you must exit that sector or theme as soon as that theme is played out. So if you know about these things, then only you should go for thematic or not sectoral.
We'll take a very short break at this point, but when we come back, we're going to look at the performances of some of these funds, whether they've actually delivered or, can they continue delivering, I think is the bigger question. We'll also be taking some of your queries, so stay tuned. You're watching the Mutual Fund Show. welcome back. You're watching the Mutual Fund Show, and today we're talking about sectoral and thematic funds. Is it all that it's cracked up to be? Now, Hemant, I want to come to you in terms of performance of some of these funds. If they're compared on an annualized basis with others in that same pack, do you think that they've done better? Is it fair to say that thematic funds have performed better, and which have been some of the best ones or your top picks within thematic funds?
Well, yes, I mean, it's not that they've done, broadly I would say they've done better, but certain categories of diversified fund like small cap and mid cap have also done quite well. If you look at categories like large cap, flexi cap, for the fact that large cap have underperformed the other two segments of the market, maybe obviously these two types of fund, sector and thematic, have done better. So clearly, like we were discussing earlier, that there are phases where some of the sector fund and thematic fund will do well. I think we are in that phase, and I strongly believe that even in the coming year, we will remain in that phase where certain themes and certain sectors will continue to do well. Yes, but whether should invest in that, we did talk about certain things that investors should keep in mind before you kind of decide to invest your money. Some of the themes that have really done well, we talked about defense, we talked about maybe PSU, as I mentioned, power and infrastructure has really done well. And I think even in terms of, there are like innovation funds. There are a couple of innovation funds that have been launched very recently, but if you look at the portfolio, the companies in those have done pretty well. So I think these are broadly some of the themes that have actually panned out very well. And my belief is that going forward, we did talk about power and infra. When looking at if the current government, the way it looks that it comes back in power, the focus will continue on these two sectors. So I think that will continue to do well. The PSU, I think, as a theme, will continue to do well. And this is again a theme where not many diversified fund will have very healthy exposure in PSU stocks. So maybe for someone who is looking to kind of expand the number of funds in the portfolio in terms of benefiting from certain things, I think these are a couple of things that one can look at. But as I mentioned, I think the key factor is the suitability, because my belief is that going forward, even the well-diversified fund like large and mid cap and the multi cap will also continue to do well. So if we haven't really explored all the possibilities of including those, I mean, don't look at sector and thematic, but if you understand the attendant risk of investing in that, I think these are a couple of themes, including defense. There are not too many opportunities to invest in that as a theme or a sector. These are themes and sectors I believe that will continue.
Specific names, Hemant, if you can add specific funds that you like?
Well, I think if I can name a few, there is HDFC Defense Fund, but it takes money only through SIP. So if you're looking at investing through SIP, you can look at that, but only up to 10,000. In the PSU, I like ABSL PSU Fund. That's a good quality portfolio and expected to do well. In power and infrastructure, I like Nippon India Power and Infrastructure Fund.
Pankaj, I'm going to ask you the same question. The thematic funds that you think will continue to deliver, obviously with all the caveats that we've spoken about risk appetite, etc.
Yeah, see, not all the sectors, but for example, we take the manufacturing. And that sector, that theme, I expect it to do better. And defense, definitely, it is expected to do well. PSU theme, as Hemant also mentioned, we expect this theme will do good in coming years as well. Manufacturing, because there is a certain reason for that also. So I expect that if investors go for these themes, they have potential to outperform the broader markets.
And specific funds?
In manufacturing, ICICI Prudential Manufacturing, that is a good choice. And defense, definitely HDFC Defense Fund, it can be considered. And power and energy, that is Nippon India Power and Energy, that is a good fund. This can be considered.
All right, so you have have a pretty clear picture of what funds to go through, ask your personal finance advisor, look at your portfolio very closely before you do that. Now, before we wrap the show today, we're going to take some queries that have been sent in to us. And if you want to send in queries, please do contact us. We'd like to address them on the Mutual Fund Show. Just do remember that adding some details about yourself will always help and will help our advisors give you the right response. So I'm going to start with a query from Ankur Chopra, who's 27. His goal is that he wants to buy a house in 2030, so in another 7 years, and will need 50 lakh rupees for a down payment. Income is 70,000 per month. Expenses are approximately 30,000 per month, and corpus is 7.5 lakhs. He's given a list of the funds he's in and says he currently has 3 SIPs of 5,000 each. Should he add another SIP in a thematic fund? If yes, then which one? Hemant, I'll come to you with this question for Ankur.
Well, I think what he's having in his portfolio is clearly one index fund, which is HDFC Nifty 50. Then there is Parak Flexi Cap Fund. This is a fund which primarily invests in large cap, and there is some exposure to US stocks, which I think is a great thing because you get some exposure to international market, which is good from a diversification point of view. And then there is a small cap fund. So clearly we don't know how much of it the allocation is being made to these. But in terms of diversification, if the intent is that he wants to look at thematic fund, I think it's too early for him to start looking at thematic fund, because I believe that his exposure to mid-cap as a segment is not there. So I think first he should invest in a mid-cap fund. Maybe he can look at Motilal Oswal mid-cap fund before start looking at any thematic fund. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to understand equity as an asset class. You need to understand what is the risk associated with that, build a reasonable size of portfolio, and then look at the thematic fund, and not at the beginning of building your portfolio.
All right. So, Ankur, you need to wait for a bit before you go into a thematic fund. Maybe look at a mid-cap fund before that. All right. We have another question. This one for Pankaj, and it's from Sonal Bhardwaj, aged 45. The goal is rebalancing of a long-term portfolio. So, Sonal says that, they perhaps have too much of a bias towards large-cap stocks and needs to consider diversification. She says, I was interested in IT as a theme. Should I consider a thematic fund, and which one to choose from? Pankaj, IT is, I think, a risky, volatile bet on most days, but what would you tell Sonal? Does she need to diversify?
Her portfolio well diversified. She has a flexi cap fund, which is large cap bias, no doubt. And she has a multi-cap, HDFC multi-cap, which has investment across the market segments. Then she has Nifty 50 index fund, which is large cap, and Nippon India small cap fund, which is a small cap fund. So she has a well diversified portfolio. Now, if she wants to consider this IT sector, yes, next 1 year, 2 years, I expect that this sector should do better. The reason is that because we have not seen that kind of performance in this sector. But if her goal is wealth creation in long term, I'll say that she should add one mid-cap fund. She doesn't have a mid-cap fund in her portfolio. So instead of going a sectoral fund, an IT sector fund, if she adds one mid-cap fund, that will be a better choice.
So maybe a mid-cap fund as an addition for you as well, Sonal. All right, that's pretty much the end of the show for us. Do write to us with your queries if you have any, and with all of these details, your age, your goal, and some details of the investments that you already have. That will help us give you better and more curated responses. Meanwhile, Hemant and Pankaj, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Thank you.
All right, that's a wrap on the Mutual Fund Show for today, but a lot more coming up on NDTV Profit. Stay tuned.